Hi, my name is Isabel Mata, and I am a writer and mental health advocate who is passionate about helping young people live their best lives, no matter where they are at on their mental health journey. As a bisexual Jewish Gemini from Rochester, New York, I let mental illness invisibly rule the first 23 years of my life. But after hitting rock bottom just a year after graduating from NYU, I finally realized that if I truly wanted to be happy, I had to do the work. With a mix of medication, mindfulness, and dialectical behavioral therapy, I somehow managed to not just live, but thrive with my mental illness. And now I want to pay it forward. Meditation, spirituality, hustle culture, sex, and love are all topics we discuss here, along with a bunch of tangible skills that can help you be your best self, even if your brain chemicals are all out of whack. This is Being Yourself Loudly. Welcome to episode not really sure yet of Being Yourself Loudly. I'm your host, Isabel Mata, and I am joined by the amazing mindfulness teacher, expert, Yael Shy, who is I like to think, a leader in the modern mindfulness movement, but I know she will say differently. Yael is the author of the award-winning book, What Now? Meditation for Your 20s and Beyond. And she is also a teacher at NYU's Wagner School of Public Service. And another fun fact about Yael is she actually founded Mindful NYU, which is the largest campus-based meditation program in the country, which is also how we met. So welcome, Yael.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I feel very, very honored. I
Oh, of
absolutely
course.
love this show.
Oh, of course, of course. So I think before we really get into the nitty gritty, I just wanted to tell people that how we met. And that's when I was doing a work study actually at NYU Global Spiritual Life, which is kind of in tandem, I guess, with Mindful NYU. They're in the same office. So I met you through that. And I just started learning about meditation and mindfulness um, thanks to you and your inspiration.
Yeah, I think when I first met you, I was always kind of um, just impressed with how much energy that you had and like how much sparkliness you brought. And I feel like you were just like a wonderful, warm, open presence to have in the office. And it's kind of just been fascinating to kind of see your journey and to see where like during some of those times, and that wasn't a secret, but I feel like you were really suffering and really struggling. And but you kind of kept remaining open to healing and to new possible ways of doing that healing. And I think that that was always there, that openness.
Yeah, but I do think a large part of it actually had to do with you and watching your experience and reading your book. I mean, I feel like I was there for the birth of your three children. You know, your two real children and then your book.
Yeah.
And getting to see what your experience is like. So I think that just goes into my first question of I know you were introduced to mindfulness by a flyer, but did this concept ever it really exist to you before you went on that silent meditation retreat?
Yeah, the retreat was my first foray, and I think I had gone to one meditation in high school. They had one special workshop where everybody had to lie down on the gym floor,
We did
and
that too.
yeah, it's funny, not much has changed. And
No.
I just remember it being like super, I just was like bored. I couldn't figure out what they were talking about. I fell asleep, and I think like I woke up when they rang the bell. And that was about my entire exposure to meditation at the time. So I was pretty convinced that it was like not for me. And when my mom gave me the flyer in college, I was completely out of options. I was having 3 panic attacks a week. I was totally filled with just nonstop anxiety and PTSD and loneliness and just struggling sometimes to even get out of bed. And so I was like, whatever, I'll do this retreat. It sounded like it was going to be, like a spa. I didn't fully understand that from the morning till the night you meditate on these things. And that's sort of what started my journey.
How did you do that with no meditation experience, being expected to just not? talk, and that is like a really intense experience.
I know. I
Oh.
don't often recommend it to people who've never done any meditation before. But on the other hand, sometimes you jump into the deep end, and in the first few days, I definitely suffered and struggled, and I was like, "What is happening here?" And I really like cried my way through the first few days, and then something shifted where I met with the teacher, and they kind of helped me to be like, this fear, because all I could get out in my meeting with the teacher was like, I'm afraid all the time. Other people were asking these like very nuanced questions about the nature of reality, and all I could say is like, I'm afraid. And I just couldn't get anything else out. And my teacher, Rabbi David Cooper, said, well, fear doesn't really like the light. Like it doesn't like being shown what it is. So maybe you can shine a light on it. And that's what I took as my practice. I kind of skipped the meditation in the hall. I went down to this little river they had, and I imagined shining a light on it. And then I started to see, well, what is actually this fear made of? What's underneath it? What are the assumptions and the voices that I was carrying around? And that really started to crack open this like kind of monster that I had been living with named anxiety, but I had never really like started to tease apart, well, what actually is anxiety? And until that moment.
That's awesome. So did that kind of spark, I mean, everything for you? Because flash forward however many years, this is now what you do for a living. This is like your purpose of sorts. Did you know it in that moment that, that this would happen, that it was going to take you down this path?
No way. I think I didn't even know that you could be a meditation teacher as a job. Like, I didn't know that type of stuff. So I never saw it as like, oh, this is the beginning of the rest of my life. But I did see it as like, wow, there is something here. I knew that. And even though it didn't like end my anxiety, it really shifted it in a major way. And then, I went to therapy. It wasn't the only thing I did, but it started to like really have a seismic shift on so many things, not just the anxiety, but like how I experience life. And so, yes, it definitely was the beginning of the rest of my life, and I just didn't know it
Yeah,
fully.
I feel like mindfulness and awareness is that thing that people don't know. They don't know how much it can help them until they experience it for the first time.
Yeah.
Because I remember doing something similar in gym class and laying on the ground, and it was like a visualization. It was like, imagine the waves. Like it was something along those lines. And I remember doing it and feeling the control that I had over those thoughts because I was focusing on it.
Mm,
And and then it was not until years later, I think, where I read a book actually about awareness, where I started to come to this idea that maybe we do have a little bit more control over our thoughts and feelings than I initially thought. Especially as someone with anxiety, it feels like you're out of control all the time. So
right.
it was a crazy concept to me that you could manage almost the things happening in your head, but by not managing them. So I think, just to backtrack a little bit, what is mindfulness?
Mm. I think that my favorite definition is um, being with what is as it is, um, and then maybe I would tack on with kindness, with like a kind intention, being with what is. And it's kind of like another word for mindfulness is just paying attention. And then I do like to add this little extra with kindness because I think we need that so often, just bring that kind of like energy to that open-minded awareness.
Yeah, I've been meditating, I think, since my first introduction to the concept was in my senior year of high school. I just had a post about it, but I was in this great books class, and my teacher was really big into meditation, and I learned about this concept, and it challenged me to look at my thoughts and feelings differently. But Flash forward, I think it's been probably 10 years since then. And I'm still kind of getting used to this idea of being aware of your thoughts and feelings with that kindness and that compassion.
Yes.
Um, because when I don't, I notice that I can notice the thoughts really well, but then I immediately go, stop. Like, don't say those things. That's not nice. Like, push it away instead of actually like acknowledging it in a more compassionate kind of way.
Yes.
Um, but it's really hard to do. Um, so for you, you spend your days now, you teach this to other people. How does it show up in your life as an individual, not as a teacher?
Good question. I think that the challenges, the times when I feel far away from being mindful are sometimes the way that I get called back into it. So times when I just am like feeling disconnected or alienated from my experience. Um, that's one way. Like for instance, sometimes just like the days go by and like you're getting into bed at the end of the day and you're like, what did I even do with this day? Like you just kind of have this bad feeling of that you weren't present, or at least for me, that I wasn't present to my life that whole day. I was just like on my phone too much, or kind of like wishing I was somewhere else. And so I think for me, that mindfulness practice, the being with what is and opening to what is just this call to return back to myself, to the moment, to my kids, who are often the ones I like trying to kind of like escape from into my phone, to like some difficult feelings I'm having in my body, all the ways I try and run away and escape that then leads to more suffering down the line. Mindfulness is like, okay, come on back, like with a lot of love to be like, this is hard. This is not easy, but it's so much less painful than pushing it away.
And how do you actually come back to it? Do you use focusing on your breath? Is there a mantra? Is there something specific that you do when you're starting to notice that you're planning or jumping ahead or having, distortions? What do you do to come back to yourself?
So that really depends on what exactly is going on. And I loved your episode about your toolkit. And I think there's so many different kinds of mindfulness or meditation tools to use for different purposes. So for instance, if I'm just feeling like kind of like that and alienated and feel a little like far away from my life, then I like to do practices that drop me into my senses, because that kind of
Mm.
like is an easy hook back into life. So I'll be like, oh my God, I just like feel really blah, or I'm on my phone too much. Step one, put down the phone. And step two is like, can I just be with this cup of tea or cup of coffee fully for a few sips, which sounds like so easy and it is so hard. And just that being with, like your senses are this doorway to feeling more like you. And so that's like one really powerful way. Or I like really, really try and listen, and I drop every other thing. And of course, the mind will come up with things and you kind of get carried away, but then you come back to just listening. And sometimes I have like a lot of birds outside my window. So just listening to their tweeting, it's can be so rejuvenating.
Real
But
life
that's
Twitter.
real life Twitter. I love that.
I was trying to practice the other day. We went for a bike ride and I kept finding myself on the bike ride just like thinking about just all the things I needed to do or just brainstorming ideas, just not like being present. So I tried to just do exactly what you just said and focus on the senses, like feeling the wind on my face as I'm biking, just looking at the greenery, the leaves, like trying to just fully feel it. But it's still hard. It's not an easy thing to practice, but I think that's why they call it practice. So do you feel like now, 20 years since you first started, do you feel like you've gotten better at it? Like is it easier for you or is it still just as hard?
I think that for me, what one of the things that made it most hard is the subtle ways that trying to pay attention to one thing kind of meant it felt like I had to kind of shove down something else. And it was like in the pursuit of mindfulness,
Mhm.
but it wasn't meanly shoving it down, but like I couldn't be present and be lost in thoughts at the same time. And so there was like a subtle, um, like shush to my thoughts. I don't know if that makes sense, but
Yes, I feel like I do that, and I try and
yeah.
shush them away to try to focus on be here and present, but then it doesn't actually those thoughts just keep coming up harder and harder. It's like when you try to push down like one of those uh kiddie bathtub like boats that you use in the bathtub, you know what I'm talking about? And you push it down and it just keeps coming back up every time.
Yes, yes. I think it took me years to like start to kind of be like, okay, this is not going well. Like there's an inner fight inside that's happening. So, like my suggestion, and one thing that's helped me a lot in that is as much as possible, it's almost like can you include any visualization it takes to open up to all of those thoughts, no matter how stupid, like sometimes it's like, you have to go buy milk, you have to go buy milk, you have to go buy milk. And I'm like, I heard you, I have to buy milk. And like, still, it's like, I have to buy milk, like whatever those circular
Yeah.
thoughts are. Can we say, like, okay, it's here? And it's and like really I imagine sometimes like inviting them to come sit next to me on the couch and be like, I see you, you're allowed here, feelings and thoughts, and then new ones will come, like, I have to do this later, I have to do this later. Okay, I see you, I got you, come sit next to me. We're going to try and now focus on this bike ride or whatever I'm doing. And it over time you do this more and more and more, it becomes just more natural, like it becomes like it's just a habit, like bloop bloop bloop, it's coming sitting next to you, it's coming sitting next to you. But it's less of just that inner struggle that I just think is part of the struggle when you're still learning the practice of, this is not trying to be repressing, but I also don't want to get totally sucked in by the thoughts.
Mm.
And so it just takes a little while to get comfortable with that. But that's the process of trying to be like, they can come, but there's something else that you're also applying your attention to.
Yeah. I especially loved, well, I think actually now's a good time to introduce one thing that I've been really excited about is this 12-week meditation mindfulness like certification program that you offer through your business, Mindfulness Consulting. It's called Flourish, and it's this incredible 12-week deep dive into your meditation practice and mindfulness. So I'm currently a part of it, and it's been incredible, I think, thus far, at least having learning a bit more about meditation and mindfulness to dive into, especially as it relates to my anxiety.
Mm,
Um, so one thing that you talked about in, I think it was maybe a few courses ago, because basically the first couple of weeks was all about like getting into the moment and just being present and focusing on that. And because that's like, check, that's like the first box of mindfulness.
that's right.
And I didn't really know up until recently that there's actually more to it, that when you actually get into the present moment, you can you can like accomplish things and you can like look inside and do more work
Mm,
rather than just sitting with it.
hmm.
Um, and I think as it relates to anxiety, the one thing that you said recently that just blew my mind that I think it would be helpful for you to explain is the place between stimulant and response is freedom. Can you just explain what that means for people who don't really understand?
Yeah, absolutely. So this actually, that I think you're quoting from my quote of Viktor Frankl, who
Yes.
said that between stimulus and response there is a gap, and in that gap is our freedom. And if we apply that to our life, we often are dragged around by our the things that trigger us. The
Mhm.
word trigger is right there. Like the second that stimulus happens, we immediately react. And part of what the beauty and the like benefit of mindfulness is it elongates that space in between when the match hits the thingy, whatever it is to start the match, and that moment when that fire comes up. So if you elongate that time, then it's not like you don't get the match starting. It's just not like you don't get that initial stimulus starting the process, but you get to have some options about how and if you respond versus reacting versus what's that automatic. And so we can kind of, I think we understand that fairly, we can kind of get that when it comes to somebody triggers you, and instead of yelling at them, you take a few deep breaths and you kind of like find your way into how you want to respond. But I think what you're pointing, where you wanted to take us, is that it also works inside so that you can have the stimulus for anxiety come up, whatever it is that normally triggers your anxiety to come up inside of you. And there can be, if you build in there, a pause before you launch full on into your anxiety response, like a panic attack, or a calling someone, getting, texting someone you shouldn't, an
Mm-hmm.
eating of something you shouldn't, a sleeping with someone you shouldn't, like all the things that are bad for you, but that like sometimes happen as the quick reaction to the trigger of the anxiety.
And especially if they're patterns that you've been doing over and over again.
Yes.
I found I related especially to this when it comes to texting, because we have at our fingertips something where we can respond so quickly to
Hmm.
things that bother us. So when I would get triggered by something, such as somebody, you know, even if it's just like seeing a picture of somebody doing something that I wanted to do, or somebody, whatever it was,
Hmm.
I would be so quick to react, which would ultimately, at the end of the day, usually get me into trouble by something. If it's
Hmm.
triple texting someone because I saw that they were using Instagram, but they're not replying to my text,
Mm.
I can instantly feel that anxiety bubble up, and then I just respond.
Hmm.
Instead of pausing and letting myself acknowledge the anxiety and those feelings by also like validating them at the same time, but
Hmm.
without having those negative consequences that follow by the response.
Yes. And there's something in the response, and this is like you have to bring a magnifying glass to really get this. Like they're in that response, what you're actually trying to do is shut down the feeling.
Mhm.
Just like get this out of my
You're
body.
trying to get that like affirmation, or like, because that payoff feels so good. As
Exactly.
as soon as I send 4 or 5 texts,
Hmm.
saw that somebody's not answering me, but they're on social media, I can see it, and then I finally get that response from them.
Hmm.
Oh, I feel so good. I can take a deep breath. I feel affirmed in my
Yeah.
anxiety. And it's that relief
Yeah.
that keeps the cycle going.
Yes.
But I almost feel like you can find the relief in this pause.
Yes. I think that's right. And you can learn to tolerate
Yes.
greater discomfort.
Mm.
One
Oh,
of the
it's
most
so hard though.
It's so hard. It's so hard. But then when you make room for that discomfort, um, and like you can make room for other things. You can be like, okay, this horrible discomfort is here, and I'm just gonna like hold it like a baby and be so nice to it. I'm not gonna like immediately get rid of it. And what else is here? Like maybe I can also be with like my delicious coffee. Clearly, I didn't drink enough coffee this morning, but like, what else can I be with that's here? Not to get rid of this bad feeling, because again, that's part of the problem is like we have no space for it. So if we can create a little space for it, then it can kind of like steady. We can move out of that kind of immediate amygdala brain that you
Mhm.
talked about, and we can kind of find our way to a little bit more regulation, and then decide maybe we want to text them anyway, but like you need to give it a little time to make that decision.
Yeah, I feel like that's something that we don't do enough, which is pause. And I think that's where mindfulness and awareness and all of these tools come in to actually, just like you said, widen that gap, give you the space to experience and acknowledge, and at least to just like make the conscious decision about what you're going to do next.
Right.
It's like taking control of your response, whereas previously you wouldn't have had any.
That's right.
If you could leave people with a piece of advice, once they've realized that mindfulness can really, really, really help people dealing with anxiety and difficult emotions, what would you tell them?
I think I would tell them that everybody's journey is about kind of unfolding into being their full self, and that all the things that you thought were so like gross and shameful and embarrassing, I promise they have within them the pieces of who you are meant to be. And I mean everything. And that is this powerful practice. That's what this powerful practice is about. It's about like true, deep acceptance of who you are so that you can flower and be yourself. And I didn't think it would ever happen to me. I thought like the things about me were so gross and shameful and bad. And that turned out to be my greatest tools for freedom and liberation. And I know the same is true for you. So that's what I would say.
Well, thank you so much for talking with me and for just being a mentor in my life. You officiated my wedding a couple of months ago. Did you watch the wedding video?
The whole thing is up?
I have to say, I'll text you the link to it. Yes, the whole thing is up.
Yes.
It's marvelous, and I'm excited to see where this journey takes us both, because I knew it back then when I was in college, when you told me that I looked like your sister, that we could be related.
That's, by the way, I think.
I think so too, that I have a feeling our lives are going to continue to be intertwined in this life we are living, and that I'll see you for class in like
Couple.
5 hours roughly.
Yes, and if you were intrigued by what Isabel's talking about,
Oh, yes.
Flourish, please, please, please find me at you can find me at mindfulnessconsulting.net, and there is a new cohort of Flourish that will open up again in the new year. There's classes that I offer that are smaller, that are shorter in duration, and all kinds of different offerings. So please find me mindfulnessconsulting.net or Yael Shy #1 on Instagram. And Isabel, you are a treasure. You're just such a treasure to myself and to this whole world.
Thank you for listening to this episode, and be sure to tune in to a new episode every 2 weeks on Sunday. This podcast is free to listen to and available in any app that supports podcasts. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe and rate and review wherever you are listening. Don't forget to take your meds.